I know that you, like you said, majored in ecology and biology.
Mhm.
Did you find yourself really kind of getting into that mindset when you were hiking? I mean, as far as like, I don't know, did you ID plants or did you notice certain behaviors from animals that you didn't expect? Or like, did that background, because you're an expert on that, like come into play at all on trail? Or did you just kind of hike and not think about that too much?
Yeah, I think probably kind of like somewhere in between, because I'm really not as good at plants as I would like to be, and it's really just from dedicating the time to ID plants. And so beforehand, there is a hiker, Sheriff Woody, who on Instagram and probably other places as well shares like the plants that he's IDing when he's hiking. And so I actually beforehand took like a little short little like kind of like webinar type thing with him, which was really interesting. And he was going through, I think he hiked the PCT twice, and the second time was specifically had the mission of like cataloging a ton of plants along the way. So it was like, broken up into like 5 sections of trail, and each trail he'd go through like 150 plants that he was IDing. So obviously I wasn't able to remember like the bulk of that information, but that was cool to see. Um, Definitely, I'm like a wildlife person, and so I'm still really terrible at like bird ID. I wish I knew more on bird calls. I knew a couple of people who did, but it was definitely interesting for me um, to see. Like, there's not, I guess, you don't necessarily see like a ton of like larger mammals than you would expect. Like I only saw probably 3 bears the whole trail. Um, had one day where I saw mountain goats, things like that. A lot of smaller mammals like marmots and pika, which I love, but it was definitely interesting. Like um, some of my research and what I've been interested in is how recreation affects wildlife. And so it was really interesting to see like, um, I've like never been in a place where like wildlife, whether it was the mountain goats or like the few times I was seeing deer, let you get that close to them or even like came up as close to you um, as they did. Because, you hear these stories about like people in parks and stuff like that going up to animals and getting in bad situations. And, um, it's kind of weird to think about because there's, um, a lot of like literature about how different forms of recreation can affect wildlife. And so I don't want to like nerd out too much, but things
Oh,
like,
I love it.
like is, say mountain biking versus hiking. Like hiking, you're, you know, moving slower, which seems less impactful, but it's like then you're around the animal for longer. You might be more likely to be talking, and that might, disturb an animal. And some wildlife can be related by things that cause them to get like spooked, like deer, for example. Basically, like if you're in a situation where you frighten a deer and it runs off into the woods. And that was like more the situation that I found in like Colorado, New York, pretty much anywhere else I've hiked. Like you come across an animal, they probably get scared of you and like run off. And so it was really weird to see like wildlife coming up, which like on the one hand is like good because then they're not getting spooked by you, which has other effects to them. But it's like, gosh, it's really like weird seeing that like animals have apparently become like so naturalized to people. Yeah, so that was really interesting. Um, and just like the wildlife I was able to see was really cool. Like I said, mountain goats. I love marmots, love pikas. Saw some weasels a couple times. Um, and then also just like, you know, was spending a lot of time thinking about like bigger things, whether it was, fires or the impacts of climate change, and thinking about how those things were affecting me on the trail, but also, like just like the future of like what life in the West is going to be like moving forward. was something that was like in the back of my head a lot. And I shouldn't say I was like reflecting all the time, and a lot of times I was like tuning stuff out and doing whatever, but did listen to I listened to one series, podcast series about like in like the 90s, like controversy surrounding like logging in like the Northwest, and controversy between like environmentalists and loggers and logging companies, and people who are starting to find out about like endangered spot owls. And so that was really interesting, like listening to that and getting a background for important issues that really shaped that area as I was hiking through it. But yeah, I won't
Yeah.
keep geeking out too much, but
Oh my gosh, I love it though.
Mhm,
And it's definitely relevant. We hike through these beautiful places and we want to protect them and um, keep them as pristine as possible. But it is
mhm,
interesting like what you witnessed, like the deers, for example, coming up close, or the different animals coming up close, and you didn't
mhm.
really see that in other states. Like it's definitely something to think about for sure,
Yeah.
especially for you because you've studied this. You've
Mhm,
studied this relationship between people and the wild. So yeah, very interesting, and I'm sure you did have a lot to think about as you were hiking.
mhm.
So I was just, yeah,
Yeah.
curious as to what your experience was just having that knowledge, because like for me, I don't really have that knowledge. I mean, I know the LNT principles, and I notice, keep animals wild, you never feed them and that sort of
Mhm,
thing, like the basics, but have studied kind of the effects and all that stuff. So yeah, I was just curious to see like what your thought process was as you were hiking. But
yeah.
it
And
sounds
I
like
think
you
it's
thought about
interesting.
that.
Mhm. And it's
And then
interesting too, like if you're like particularly hiking around with people who are from the area, like learning from other people. Because even if you're not thinking about like bigger issues, it's like nice to know, like, hey, what is that plant? Like, can I eat that berry or whatever it is? Um, it's
right.
just fun and useful to know.
Yeah, and you do learn that from other hikers as well.
Hmm.
Like with the berries, I was afraid to eat any berries because sometimes that could go really wrong if you eat the
Hmm.
wrong berry, right? So I was like really scared. But then once I shared, hikers shared the information with me, I felt comfortable. So yeah, there's definitely the exchange there that's nice on trail too.
Hmm.
To learn more,
Yeah.
certainly, yeah. So thank you. I was definitely wanting to see what your thoughts were on just like, you know what you were thinking about as you were hiking, since you're the
Yeah.
you're the expert.